They called it the deal of the decade, $600 million that would change lives, fortunes, and futures. Everything was moments from being signed, every eye fixed on the glittering prize. But in the shadows of that boardroom, a truth waited, carried not by a billionaire, not by a lawyer, but by the daughter of a maid. What she revealed in a language many tried to dismiss shattered more than a contract. It shattered illusions of power, privilege, and belonging. Because sometimes, the voice ignored the most becomes the one that cannot be silenced. The question is, why did it take her to expose it? She wasn't supposed to even be in the room. The daughter of a maid, quiet, observant, often overlooked. While the wealthy spoke in polished tones and signed documents worth millions, she sat in the background, translating scraps of conversation for her mother, doing homework in the corners of houses she could never call her own. Her life was simple and in many ways invisible. Days were filled with school, evenings with helping her mother clean. She knew the smell of marble hallways and polished wood, the silence of luxury, and the way people's eyes skipped past her as though she wasn't there. Still, she carried a sharp mind, fluent in a language others dismissed, a gift inherited and nurtured in private. That night, as powerful men prepared to close the $600 million deal, she was just another shadow in the corner of the room, until she caught words not meant to be understood. Words whispered in Arabic, words sharp with mockery, dripping with prejudice, folded into the very heart of the agreement. No one noticed her pause, the tightening in her chest, the way her fingers curled into fists. But in that instant, she knew. What they thought was hidden was about to change everything. The pen hovered over the final page, a signature away from $600 million. Cameras were ready, contracts neatly stacked, polished shoes tapping on the marble floor in anticipation of history being made. But in that grand room, lined with towering windows and silent guards at the door, the maid's daughter sat small and unnoticed. She was used to being invisible. Authorities, investors, even guests with practiced smiles, they all knew her only as the help's child. But her silence was never emptiness. Every glance, every exchange, every whispered remark slipped into her mind, keeping her sharper than anyone dared admit. And then she heard it. The words, in Arabic, a language her mother had taught her as a shield of identity in a world that often tried to erase it. The tone was casual, mocking, powerful men laughing at the maid who swept their crumbs, sneering about her foreign tongue, dismissing her daughter's presence as if she were an empty chair in the corner. At first, she doubted herself. Maybe she misheard. But as the laughter stretched, the cruelty sharpened. One man even joked that such people did not belong in the world of billion-dollar deals, that they should remain in kitchens and back halls. Their prejudice wasn't just words. It was venom laced into celebration, spoken in Arabic because they believed no one there could understand. Her chest burned, her ears rang. Her mind screamed with questions. Should she stay silent like she always had? Should she protect her mother, swallow the insult, and let injustice sign itself into permanence? The weight of $600 million pressed against the back of her throat. The deal wasn't just money, it was power, reputation, control. And she had none of it. Yet the shame they coated in mockery wasn't hers to carry. It belonged to them. Each second ticked louder on the golden clock above the table. Every heartbeat seemed to chant, "Speak, speak, speak!" The maid's daughter shifted in her chair. Papers rustled. A head turned toward her for perhaps the first time all night. One of the men chuckled to his friend and, still in Arabic, muttered that children of maids should be grateful for crumbs. The words sliced like glass. Something inside her, years of being diminished, erased, ignored, ignited into fire. Her fists unclenched. Her breath steadied. She prepared to stand, and in that moment, a silence spread through the room, a silence thick enough to smother marble halls and freeze tapping shoes. Because for the first time, the girl who was never seen was about to make everyone look. For a split second, she thought about shrinking back into silence. That was what the world expected of her, to swallow the insult, to bear the weight of invisibility yet again. But her body rose before her fear could stop it. The scraping of her chair against the polished floor sliced through the room like a blade. Every head turned. Every eye pinned her. Confusion painted across their faces. It was the first time she existed in their world, not as background, but as interruption. And then she spoke, in flawless Arabic. Her words came sharp and steady, every syllable a strike against the arrogance that had filled the air moments before. She repeated what they had said, word for word, exposing their cruelty to the silence of the room. Gasps broke out. Papers froze in trembling hands. The mockery that was supposed to be their hidden joke became their public shame. But it wasn't only the accuracy of her translation that made the walls quake. It was the truth underlining it. For years, she and her mother had been treated as though their lives, their culture, their language were beneath this gilded space. With every phrase she repeated, she forced them to see what they had built their fortune on: ridicule, exclusion, and prejudice wrapped in wealth and pride. The tension snapped like glass. One executive stumbled forward, voice cracking in denial. Another shouted for her to sit down, to be quiet. But her voice only grew steadier. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being silenced. And then, it happened. A hand reached across the table, yanking the contract away before the pen touched the page. A multi-million-dollar deal dissolved in seconds. The maid's daughter stood trembling, her chest rising in defiance. $600 million meant nothing compared to what had just unraveled, the buried truth of who was considered worthy and who was not. The room burned with silence again. And the question lingered like smoke. What happens when the powerless refuse to stay quiet? When the ink on the contracts dried to nothing, the boardroom parted like waves around her. Some stormed out in anger, their empire crumbling before their eyes. Others sat frozen, smothered by the shame of being exposed in their own words. But she remained standing. For once in her life, she was not invisible. She was the mirror they tried so hard to avoid. The aftermath wasn't easy. Whispers followed her mother. Doors that had opened for others slammed shut for them. Speaking truth to power always comes at a price. Yet something irreversible had happened in that moment. A voice they had dismissed as insignificant had revealed the rot beneath their wealth. A $600 million deal didn't collapse because of ink and paper. It collapsed because arrogance and racism were dragged into the light. For the maid's daughter, the impact was as heavy as it was liberating. The fear that had once made her hide her language now gave way to pride. Her Arabic was no longer just a private bond with her mother. It became a weapon against erasure, a reminder that culture and humanity cannot be erased by marble floors or contracts. But what about us? Listening now. What does this story say about where we are? Racism is not always shouted in the streets. Sometimes it's whispered in boardrooms, coded in jokes, or hidden in languages people assume no one will understand. And when those words go unchallenged, deals are signed, systems are built, and injustice thrives. So maybe the question isn't why she spoke up. Maybe the question is, how many of us stay silent when we hear the same cruelty in our world today? And when the next deal is on the table, big or small, whose side of truth will we stand on?